And now, a passage from Boston Traders in Hawaiian Islands, 1789 to 1823, by S. E. Morrison. On October 15th, 1819, there was an interesting ceremony in the vestry of Park Street Church, Boston. A company of 7 missionaries with their wives and children, and with 3 natives of Hawaii, were formed into a Church of Christ to go out and convert the heathen of the Sandwich Islands. The next morning, at a special meeting in the same house of worship, Hopu, the most hopeful of the Hawaiians, addressed a crowded assembly. It was a most affecting spectacle to see a native of Hawaii preaching the gospel to the citizens of Boston. So great was the interest in this missionary enterprise of the Orthodox New England Church that over 500 persons received Holy Communion at a farewell service the following Sabbath. On Saturday morning, October 23rd, the final farewell took place at Long Wharf, crowded with sympathetic spectators. The Reverend Dr. Worcester offered up a prayer, Hopu delivered another speech, and all united in singing, "Blessed be the tie that binds, and when shall we all meet again?" A barge from the USS Independence conveyed the missionaries to the vessel chartered for the voyage by the American Board, the brig Thaddeus of Boston, which in a short time weighed anchor and dropped down the stream to Boston Light. Over 5 months elapsed before this Hawaiian Mayflower raised the snow-crowned summit of Mauna Loa. On April 4th, 1820, 163 days out from Boston, the Thaddeus came to anchor abreast the large heathen village of Kailua, where a multitude of shouting and almost naked natives, including the king and queens, were playing on the beach and sporting in the surf. A bright and pleasing spectacle, we would think, but to the missionaries it merely exhibited the appalling darkness of the land which we had come to enlighten. Later in the day, the royal family was entertained at dinner on the brig's quarterdeck. King Liholiho, dressed in a feather wreath, a string of beads, and a loincloth, made his first acquaintance with white women, and George Tamery, a graceless native member of the missionary contingent, furnished music for the meal on an orthodox bass viol. Thus began the first Christian mission in Hawaii, the centenary of which is being celebrated this year. 1820 is to Hawaii what 1620 is to New England. Yet we must not forget the precursors to the Pilgrims. Here, as in New France, New Spain, and New England, the trader had preceded the missionary. For a generation previous to 1820, the scorbutic, storm-tossed seamen of New England had found rest, healing, and even profit in these islands of the blessed. When independence closed our colonial trade routes within the British Empire, the merchantmen and whalers of New England swarmed around the Horn in search of new markets and sources of supply. The opening of the China trade was the first and most spectacular result of this enterprise. The establishment of trading relations with Hawaii followed shortly. Years before the westward land movement gathered momentum, the energies of seafaring New England found their natural outlet along their traditional pathway in the Pacific Ocean. Probably the first American vessel to touch at Hawaii was the famous Columbia of Boston, Captain Robert Gray, on August 24, 1789, in the course of her first voyage around the world. She remained 24 days at the islands, salted down 5 puncheons of pork, and sailed with 150 live hogs on deck. A young native called Atu, who shipped there as ordinary seaman, attracted much attention at Boston on the Columbia's return by his gorgeous feather cloak and helmet. Atu was the first of several young Hawaiians who, arriving in New England as seamen on merchant vessels, influenced the American Board of Foreign Missions to found the mission school at Cornwall, Connecticut, which was the origin of the famous mission of 1819-20. Other Kanakas, as they were called this early, did not reach so pious a destination. A native boy whom Captain Amasa Delano shipped from Hawaii in 1801 performed on the Boston stage in the tragedy of Captain Cook and was much admired by the audience and the public in general. The Boston traders who followed the Columbia to the northwest coast and Canton found the islands as they called the Hawaiian group, an ideal place to procure fresh provisions in the course of their 3-year voyages. Captain Joseph Ingram stopped there in the Hope of Boston in May 1792. 5 months later, Captain Gray, fresh from his discovery of the Columbia River, made the Isle of Hawaii one of the Sandwich Islands, writes John Boyd Jr., the 17-year-old fifth mate of this famous vessel. In his remarks on the ship Columbia's voyage for October 30th, he says, 30. Hove to for some canoes and purchased 11 hogs from the natives and plenty of vegetables such as sweet potatoes, yams, taro, etc. The men were fine, stately-looking fellows, and the women quite handsome. They were all in a state of nature except a small covering round the middle. Not many of the Columbia's crew proved to be Joseph's. Run along very near the isles and hove to off Karakakua Bay. 31. Stood around the island and hauled into Toajaya Bay and hove to. Vast many canoes sailing in company with us, the shore made a delightful appearance and appeared in the highest state of cultivation. Many canoes alongside containing beautiful women, plenty of hogs and fowls, together with most of the tropical fruits in abundance, great quantities of water and musk, melons, sugarcane, breadfruit, and salt was brought for sale. The price of a large hog was from 5 to 10 spikes, smaller ones in proportion, 6 dunghill fowls for an iron chisel, and fruit cheaper still. November 3rd, bore off and made all sail for the coast of China, and soon lost sight of these beautiful isles, the inhabitants of which appeared to me to be the happiest people in the world. Indeed, there was something in them so frank and cheerful that you could not help feeling prepossessed in their favor. Just 3 years later, on October 12th, 1795, the same young man commanding the sloop Union in a voyage around the world sighted Hawaii bearing W by S 30 leagues. October 13th, brisk breezes and flying clouds with distant thunder. At 6 p.m., tacked offshore, many large fires in the land. The extremes of the isle from WBN to SEBS, 3 or 4 leagues from nearest shore. Midnight pleasant. At daylight we were visited by plenty of canoes filled with natives. They brought a great quantity of hogs and fruits, which they readily parted with in exchange for nails and iron hoops. The females were quite amorous. October 14th, pleasant, agreeable weather, laying off and on the northeast point of Hawaii, vast many canoes with natives alongside, with abundance of good things, employed through the day trafficking. They appeared all as happy as princes. The next day, John Boyd was visited by an Englishman, John Young, formerly boatswain of the New York Snow Eleanor, who had lived at Hawaii for 7 years. Young filled him up with so many tales of native treachery toward visiting traders that Captain Boyd's opinions of the Hawaiians were modified. Small merchantmen have no business to venture themselves there, he concludes. I hold them among the worst of savages, for if they had that savage and ferocious appearance so strongly pictured on the face of the Northwest Indians, they would not be so likely to deceive Europeans who, by trusting too much to appearances, have been artfully murdered. It did not take long for the Northwest Coast fur traders to discover at Hawaii a new medium for the Canton market. That market was, of course, the prime object of our Northwest fur trade. China took nothing that the United States produced. Hence, Boston traders, in order to obtain the wherewithal to purchase teas and silks at Canton, spent 18 months or more of each China voyage collecting a cargo of sea otter skins highly esteemed by the mandarins. Salem traders, in the same quest for the wealth of the Indies, resorted to various South Sea islands for edible birds' nests and bêche de mer or trepang, a variety of sea cucumber that tickled the Mandarin palate. Captain Kendrick, who originally commanded the Columbia but remained in Pacific waters in her consort, the sloop Lady Washington, discovered about the year 1791 that Hawaii produced sandalwood, an article in great demand at Canton. Captain Vancouver found on the island of Kauai in March 1792 an Englishman, a Welshman, and an Irishman whom Kendrick had left there the previous October to collect pearls and sandalwood against his return. Presumably, the produce of their labor was marketed, but not long afterward, Captain Kendrick was killed as an accidental result of his intimate interest in Hawaiian affairs. He and his crew helped the chief of Oahu defeat the chief of Kauai at the Battle of Kalaʻau in December 1794. Lying in Honolulu harbor with him was the English trading vessel Jackal, Captain Brown, the crew of which had also taken part in the battle. To celebrate their victory, Captain Kendrick hoisted his ensign on the Lady Washington and fired a Federal salute, to which the Jackal replied. Captain Brown ordered several of his guns unshotted for the purpose, but by mistake, the gunner fired one of those that was still charged with round and grape. A ball penetrated the Lady Washington's cabin and killed her commander, one of the ablest of our pioneer shipmasters in the Pacific. Practically every vessel that visited the North Pacific in the closing years of the 18th century stopped at Hawaii for refreshment and recreation, but it was not until the opening years of the 19th that the sandalwood business became a recognized branch of trade. The imports at Canton of that fragrant commodity in American vessels rose from 900 pikuls of 133 1/3 pounds each in 1804 to 05 to 19,036 pikuls in 1811 to 12. Sandalwood, geography, and fresh provisions made the islands a vital link in a closely articulated trade route between Boston, the northwest coast, and Canton. A typical voyage is that of the ship Pearl, Captain John Suter, owned by James and Thomas Lamb, James and Thomas H. Perkins, and Russell Sturgis, all of Boston. She sailed thence on July 23, 1807. On January 13, 1808, she anchored at the Sandwich Islands and procured fresh provisions. The next 20 months, from February 1808 to October 1809, were spent along the northwest coast, procuring beaver and sea otter skins, thence to the islands, stopping a few days in late October and taking on provisions and wood. Arrived at Whampoa, the foreign port of Canton, December 5th. Sailed March 11, 1810, in company with Theodore Lyman's ship Vancouver, Captain Whittemore, the two vessels sailing up Boston Harbor almost abreast on August 4th, 1810. One of the earliest white residents of the islands was George Maclay, a Yankee ship carpenter who drifted into Honolulu sometime between 1793 and 1806. Captain Amasa Delano of Duxbury, on whose ship he had formerly sailed, found him at the islands in 1806 with a well-established boat-building business. He had built 20 small vessels and a few as large as 50 tons burden. Late in the year 1811, the ship Albatross, owned by the Winship brothers of Boston and Brighton, and commanded by one of them, Captain Nathan, put in at Honolulu.